Please welcome writer-director Farah Nabulsi. Thank you so much for being here. It's such a powerful film. To start off, I wanted to ask you about a particular scene in the film. During the scene where Jacob dies, it starts with the burning of the olive trees, and then as he's being held, you kind of frame the shot with those burning trees. Can you talk more about the significance of that element of the scene and kind of the weight of that image?
Oh, wow. Very specific. I mean, in some ways, you could almost say that final shot where you do see the trees burning and they're all on the ground and is very symbolic of the reality on the ground. I have personally been in specifically, actually, the village of Bureen, where the teacher is from. And I have witnessed olive groves being torched by illegal settlers. And so, actually, that shot, I think, for me, and the entire scene, but that final kind of moment, is just reflective of the reality. And so, there's something very powerful in that, I think.
And speaking of sort of those realities and how that influences the film, can you talk about, you've shot the film on location in Palestine, can you talk about when you're making a film like this that deals with day-to-day realities, what's, the weight of that experience as far as capturing that on screen in a narrative, but at the same time, the real thing is all around the production?
Yeah, so I mean, independent cinema, we've been talking about that a bit. Independent cinema is just so difficult no matter where you are in the world. And then to be shooting a film that's set in kind of militarily occupied territory, a place that is actively being colonized and a place of apartheid, and to sort of, because it's not a period drama, it's not something that happened a long time ago and then we're reenacting it in the place it happened. It is happening every day as we speak. And you know that you're going to run into certain issues and problems like checkpoints and roadblocks. And so an example of something that was frustrating was there was a weekend where everyone went away and 2 days off, but they couldn't get back for 4 days because there were roadblocks. Now, in independent cinema, you're like, that's money just flying into the air, and I had nightmares of unfinished sets, and but these are things I kind of expected. What I had underestimated and was the hardest thing for me personally, as director, also a producer on the film, and as a human being, to be honest, just simply, is that when things were happening, that suddenly it hit you how close, and then this sort of pressure to do justice to the injustice that's taking place around you. So an example is that on my way to work one day at sort of 6 in the morning, 5, 6 in the morning, I passed by a couple and their 6 children standing in front of the rubble of their freshly demolished home that had just been demolished by the Israeli military a few hours earlier. Now, that's something that takes place in the film. But how do you get on with your day? You know what I mean? How do you carry on and stay positive and lead your team? And I got out my car and chatted with the mother and ended up hugging her for 3 minutes, both of us crying, complete stranger. And so it's that, oh wow, there's so much more responsibility and weight in this story, in this film. And also the cast and crew that you're working with. It means so much. And so these kind of incidents would happen a lot. During the entire prep and shoot period, 6 teenage boys were killed by the military or settlers in the Nablus area, which is where we were shooting. So that's where I felt the most challenges were. And you'd think that'd be obvious, but I'd underestimated how it would affect me. And you want to keep everyone safe, and and make sure you get to the finish line before something bigger happens. So it was overwhelming, to be honest.
And you mentioned the cast and crew. You know, you have people from the region, but you also have people international. How did that, you know, did that impact their work as far as being a learning experience for them?
Every one of the cast and the crew that came from abroad individually told me this is one of the most life-changing experiences they've had. And they loved being there, actually. It was a very close community that we had together, but also just them being able to spend time in Palestine, a place they'd never been, pretty much all of them that came from abroad, except for Gilles Porte, who was the DOP, a French DOP, who'd been to Palestine before, but not as long as this. And they really appreciated the people, the environment, the hospitality, the generosity. But they were also appalled. I mean, you know, in the French, they were like calling their friends and saying, "Oh, this is happening here, and what is this?" And we were like, I was like, "Oh, wow, they're feeling really, really passionate about the reality that they had come really close and up and personal with." But working with the local crew and cast, because the opportunities are not, you know, they're far and few in the West Bank. So being able to sort of mentor as well and work with them was really, really great, actually. So it was great. It was beautiful in the end. They weren't nervous. I think they arrived more nervous. And then they could see that we'd kind of cocooned ourselves. It's not a documentary film, you know, and we were trying to stay under the radar and avoid problems, but problems found us, and they understood, and I promised them, I assured them, like if I felt anyone was going to be unsafe beyond what we all should have expected, we would stop. Only towards the end, and actually all our international crew cast had left the cast. The Israelis started to drop bombs on Gaza the last 2 weeks. Gaza is separate to the West Bank, but in the West Bank, everyone is on edge, of course, when that happens. And at one point, it was suggested that we stopped shooting, and that's 2 weeks out from wrap, and I was really reluctant, and we didn't. But we were shooting the scene with the final climactic scene in the settler's house, and that involves military outfits and weapons, and we had to shoot that in the heart of Nablus, the main city, and we put up these big black, I don't know what you call them, shades, or so that the locals could not see us in case they actually mistook them as real soldiers or something, and that it would cause like a ruckus. So you are on edge. You are on edge, but you are taking precautions, and it's a bit of guerrilla filmmaking, as it were.
And it's a really powerful narrative constructed in the film because, you know, we're given so much insight into the lives of these characters and the context from which they come, because, you know, this is the kind of story you might hear about on the news, but it's kind of reduced to bullet points. So can you talk about that approach to, you know, kind of broadening something so we kind of get to know them on a human-to-human level?
Look, I mean, that's the power of cinema. That's the beauty of cinema, isn't it? It's this kind of most powerful, beautiful means of meaningful human communication and art forms the world has ever known. And it really, it does have this power to challenge stereotypes and overcome misconceptions and misperceptions, and this sort of visual world with an emotional resonance that the news and headlines can never convey, and they never do convey. And I think that's, for me, you know, it's so sad that context that's so important seems to be missing from the discourse on subjects like Palestine. And so to be able to sort of bring, like you said, sort of the characters and the sort of humanity of people closer in this faraway land, and it's just less abstract, and is just so powerful, and I think hugely important, Because if everyone just had a little bit more understanding and empathy towards their fellow human beings, regardless of the color of their skin or the color of their eyes or the language barrier, I just think we would solve a lot more problems in the world. And so for me, that it's just the medium that absolutely makes sense to tell this kind of story. It's what I'm drawn to, but it's also what I believe has the most resonance. And I hope it did. I hope it is that kind of story that did that. Yeah.
And then I wanted to ask sort of about your writing process in developing this narrative, because we get so many, of these, we get this group of characters and all these varying perspectives, because we have Bassem, we have the family, we have the parents of the pilot, we kind of have all these, point of views that all kind of weave together in this larger portrait. Can you talk about balancing all of those during the writing process?
Well, I mean, the writing process is obviously rooted in the story, as it were, in the first place. And so it's more coming up with the story, which is a sort of amalgamation of all these different kind of real life experiences of people, Palestinians that I've met with and I've chatted with numerous times, who have experienced firsthand much of the sort of cruel, inhumane things that take place in the film. Whether it be the home demolitions, being processed through military detention, the settler violence and vandalism, and also a story about an Israeli occupation soldier called Gilad Shalit, who was captured in 2006, and in 2011, he was released for over 1,000 Palestinian political prisoners, hundreds of whom were women and children, and hundreds of whom were being held in administrative detention, which means without trial or charge. And this imbalance in value for human life was something that I was shocked by, or it really kind of hit home. And so I kind of took this sort of amalgamation of all those different elements and aspects, and then coupled it with the vivid visual verbal imagination of a filmmaker or a writer at that point. I don't feel like I feel like an imposter when I say, like, I'm a writer, but, I'm inspired and I start to write. And then you've got two things going on. You've got the strategic structural approach, right? An emotional journey. Does the story add up? Do things make sense? Do I need to add devices? It's the writing process. And then there's the personal human, how do I stay true? It's fiction narrative, but it's so heavily rooted in reality. And how do I stay true to the lived experience of all those involved? And so when I came across the story of Gilad Shalit, yes, I thought, what a crazy imbalance in value for human life. But I also remember thinking, well, to that soldier's parents and loved ones, he's worth the universe. I mean, ask me what any of my children are worth. And it's a rhetorical question, but the world. So I was interested in Simon, this, because for me, it's a parental love. The themes are parental love, the pursuit of justice, the inevitability of resistance. But it's an interesting dynamic, the two fathers, but also then exploring the dynamic that one has a recourse to justice and the other doesn't. And so it's just being curious and yes, structurally trying to make sure everything makes sense. And, and I joke, but there's like 3,670 drafts of this screenplay, so it took a long time. But just also staying true to the reality. And that's rooted very much in the conversations and things I've witnessed, and exercising empathy. I don't know if I've answered your question really, but yeah, it's a painful process.
And you mentioned kind of this through line of father-son relationships, because you have Simon searching for his son, you have Bassem and sort of the backstory with his son, and also the way he's kind of this mentor to Adam. Can you talk about, making this sort of the motif that and this point of connection between all of those narratives?
Oh, I think the sort of this father-son or parental love theme element is what in many ways pushes the entire film forward, and the story forward, and culminates in what culminates at the end. You know, what would you be willing to sacrifice? How do you cope with grief? How do you cope with self-absolution, self-forgiveness? I mean, no matter what happens to our children, we'll always blame ourselves, whether it's your fault or not your fault. You know, what would you do to get your son back? In the case of Simon, what would you do, you know, when you've lost your son? How do you, all these different elements, and that result in this surrogate father-son relationship between Bassem and Adam in the end, is the thread, is the thread that, or I'd say the thread, the core actually, that kind of holds it together for me. And so in the end, Bassem being able to save Adam in a way he couldn't save his own son. And yet, ironically, he ends up in the place that his son died in, that he saved 1,000 others from. That is something. Is it a happy ending? Is it, you know, is it? Are we? How do we feel about Bassem probably having X life sentences now, and yet he has saved Adam, but has he saved Adam? Adam is now the teacher, and Adam is still in this world that is, it may not be the prison, but there's a bigger prison. And so it's yeah, how do you protect the people you love? And then when it comes to Simon, it's like I mentioned, yes, the parallel, and you've got that scene in the corridor, and that conversation, and that father-to-father moment. So there's this parallel, but they are opposite and completely divergent in the sense that Bassem and Adam have no recourse to justice. The courts that they turn to for justice are one and the same as those complicit in the crime, so the system is rigged. And they have no one to turn to, which is sadly the case for Palestinians in general, whereas Simon gets his son back, and he had a power, he had his government, he had a recourse, he had agency, but yet, father to father, regardless of politics, religion, all of it, the love of a father is universal in that sense. And so, for me, that's a main. It's what pushes the film forward in so many ways.
And the character of Bassem at the center of the film, you know, the titular, the teacher, is such a multifaceted, complex character, and it's just, you know, it's like who could bring life to this role, but Salah Bakri in the main role just does such an incredible job and has such screen presence and brings such, you know, gravity to that role. Can you talk about crafting that character and working with him to kind of really bring that performance to life?
So Saleh and I had made a short film together. My previous short film was called The Present, and it had done so beautifully well, as it were. When I say well, I mean 60 international awards. As you know, we set an Oscar nomination, it won a BAFTA, so we'd done some good work together, you know? So in that sense, it kind of made sense to kind of collaborate again. So I was in Palestine, one of my travels, and I hadn't even written the first draft of The Teacher. And I was visiting, and I said to him, look, I want to talk you through a story I have. I think it's going to be a feature-length film versus a series, or, you know. And I verbalized for the first time The Teacher to anyone. And he listened very patiently, and about 30 minutes later, I said, so what do you think? And he's like, I like it. I was like, okay, you're going to be the teacher? He's like, yeah, I'm going to be the teacher. I was like, done. So that's how I cast him. Now, he's a really, really seasoned actor. He's far more experienced than I am. This is my first feature-length film. Whereas he's really, like you said, he's a force to be reckoned with. And so there was a few things. They say, you know, never write a script with a specific actor in mind. but I couldn't help it. So yes, he was my muse in many ways. And there's a bit of Bassem in Saleh and Saleh in Bassem, I think for sure. And we also worked on translation. So I write in English. I think in English. I speak Arabic. I write and read Arabic like a 6, 7-year-old. So for me to be able to work with my actor and the actor to be able to work with the filmmaker, the director and the writer, to really get the essence of the language in Arabic and even the fluidity of it and how it, you know, flows from the tongue and the poetical elements of it, and was really something. So we did that together. And then we would just, you know, when you work with an actor more than once, you get to know them that much more. What kind of set environment they like, and flourish in, what they don't like, what they need from you, don't need from you, preparation, rehearsal period, and so on. So we managed to do a lot of work in prep, and at some point you surrender the character, you surrender the role to your actor, and you trust them. You know, now that you've said everything you need to say, and you've gone through every scene together, and you've every line and every, you know, and queries and reservations both ways. And then that's it. You, to me, with someone like Saleh, you can surrender it. And then on set, he's also trusting you to sort of, keep an eye and keep him on track and, you know, adjust when needed. But ultimately, it's a trust thing at the end. And I will say that there was one point where 3 days before shooting a key scene, he said, Farah, I feel like this scene, you might want to look at it again, and you might want to sort of rewrite it a bit. Not the essence of what happens in the scene, but like, and it was like, he knew, it was something that I knew, but from a long time ago. But in the writing process, you get exhausted and you, no one's gonna notice, or okay, I'll come back to it at some point, but you never do. And so he pointed his finger at it, because Saleh is a very honest actor and human being, sometimes brutally so. But I think his honesty is what it's like a superpower. That's what brings such incredible performance, the truthfulness of everything that he brings to the character. So when he says something like that to you, you know, I respected it. And I was like, that's the last thing I want to do. My husband was visiting with my boys. I was like, it was the only weekend I was going to see them, but he was right, and I knew that. So I actually ended up, they'd all gone to bed, and late at night, I rewrote that scene, and I'm just so glad I did. So, you know, to be able to have that kind of relationship is something. And we do have that kind of collaboration. Sometimes if I had a production issue that I wanted to like vent, I would be able to say to him, or take a little bit of an artistic opinion on something. I don't always have to listen to him, but I will, because I value his opinion. And so it's really, the relationship has evolved. And I feel like in some ways, we co-created Bassem. I didn't involve him so much in the initial script writing of the story, though. But definitely he's had his and when we were in that rehearsal period, I did change lines, depending on how we were speaking them and translating them, and, you know, which you would never be able to do if you were just the director and not the writer, but also if you had various executives that you had to kind of cross-check with, and we had the privilege of not having to do that. And there's something really wonderful about that.
And
it was a really long answer.
It was wonderful, thank you. His character, Bassem, through the way he interacts, you know, we see the flashbacks to his son, and we also see his relationship to these young men now, and we kind of it highlights this theme of, you know, sort of the loss or the corruption of innocence in, you know, when people are in circumstances like these, and it's kind of one of the themes highlighted in the work. Can you talk about exploring that and sort of the way he is trying to, you know, protect these characters?
I mean, I think, you know, when I even think about where this story came from inside of me, as a parent, I have five kids of my own, and I think it has impacted so much of who I am as a human being and as a parent, and the love I have for my own children has informed so much of my existence, that when people sort of say, okay, you know, this the parent, the father-son thing, but parent-to-child thing, and then the idea that whenever I have been in Palestine and I see these teenage, and for me, boys, that, you know, I have three teenage boys of my own, I see my own children, you know. And Saleh, he became a father about 4 years ago for the first time. So even in the present, my previous film, he's a father to a girl in that film, but at the time he was not a parent when we shot that. And I remember not arguing, but there were moments where he didn't quite understand the essence or the truth of some of the moments in the present. And I'd say, look, this is why he's done this, or this is why, you know. Whereas with the teacher, it's like he had stepped in to his own fatherhood, that he could understand, and it would resonate so much more with him, the whole dynamic, whether it's the love and loss and grief for his own son, or the desire to protect Adam, this new surrogate son. And so being able to speak to the essence of who he is now, and in my case, who I am, I think it lent itself in a very powerful way to this story, to this film. At least I hope so, but that's, you know. But the theme being that, you know, Palestinian children, really, they are forced to grow up too soon. And to be honest, in this last year and a half of genocide in Gaza, where children aren't even being able to grow up. I mean, in the tens of thousands, they're being slaughtered, and it's like, they're children. I think, you know, in Palestine, you speak to some of these young girls, boys, and they're talking like they're 60 years old. It's bizarre. And at the same time, I think my own teenage boys, you know, I showed them a 3-hour, 15-minute version of this film. And I thought, this is the litmus test. Like, if my boys can sit through this and appreciate it. And, you know, the minute Yaqub was killed, they were like, what the hell? And oh my God, and I'm a revenge, and teenage boys, and that reaction that is totally normal and natural to sort of, you know, and I think that that's sometimes kind of underestimated or it's misunderstood. So there's just a lot of themes in this film, I think, that you know, this idea of like, well, how can someone who's 18, 19, in the case of Adam, 16, but I've met young men who are 14, 15, and they are willing to hold a weapon to defend their lands or defend their families, or, and it's sad, but you say revenge. Is it revenge? And this is, so it's very powerful to have a figure who can guide between resistance and revenge. But, you know, and I think that that's a really important theme that I wanted to sort of look into, and Saleh as an actor appreciates, as a Palestinian as well, and then as a father. And it's just, there's a lot to unpack, I think. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask, so the film is played at numerous international film festivals across the world, and it's being released in theaters. So I wanted to ask, you know, what have you made of the, you know, it's won awards at many of those festivals, and it's been embraced by audiences. What have you made of the reaction so far, and what do you hope people can ultimately take away from the film?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so we premiered at Toronto International Film Festival 2023 in September, and then a month later was October 7th. And then this last year and a half of soul-shattering devastation. And so it's interesting because, yes, you're right, the reactions have been incredible. We've won over 20 international awards now, including a number from US festivals, and Best Actor awards for Saleh. And I think when I first set out with this film, my intention was to take audiences on an emotional journey into the lives and experiences of these characters. And I hope I leave you contemplating the sort of choices and decisions the characters make and this very sort of cruel reality in which they're forced to make them. But now, in the current context and pertinent time that we're in, I just really hope this film can offer a deeply human context that is so important but is often missing from the discourse. And I want audiences to ask themselves, is this a reality I would accept for myself? And if it isn't, then why have Palestinians been expected to? And yes, it takes cinema even beyond, and it is for me sort of raising the global social conscience, because we are in a time of genocide, and that's the crime of all crimes. So regardless of anyone's background, anyone's political views, affinities, is this acceptable? That's it, really. I hope those questions are laid at their feet and you contemplate.
Well, it's an incredibly powerful film. Thank you so much for being here to share it with our audience. Thank you all for being here, and spread the word. The film is playing at the SBIFF Film Center for the next week, so thank you all for coming.